Game Design and Game Views Podcast, Episode 2, Attack of the Podcast. Dun dun dun. I'm David. This is.
The lunatic known as Tim?
Okay, I will add that to my notes. Lunatic known as Tim. Let me call up Arkham Asylum real quick.
Or since you brought up Arkham,
Great game series, by the way. I know you haven't
let's
played them.
talk let's talk about them from the perspective of the story.
Story of Arkham. That's a very long, overarching story because there's like 4 or 5 games in that series now. But yeah, that's a good story if you like Batman stories.
So what was the basic premise and how well do you think it was executed?
Ooh, the basic premise is full of spoilers if I tell everybody everything.
I mean, how old is that series now?
But it's pretty old, yeah. But
Okay, yeah. Spoiler alert, everyone.
you
We're going to
have
be
to
talking
fight the
about
Joker.
games today that have already been released, and there's enough time that if you don't know the stories yet, yeah, I mean, oh well. Skip ahead. I'll put a time marker maybe somewhere.
Maybe. Ooh, that means no.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Like
been a
the whole
while.
episode. Like the whole episode today is going to be
Yeah,
spoilers. So if
since
you don't want anything spoiled, don't listen.
yeah, since we are going to be talking about stories, there may be some spoilers contained within. It's a fair warning to everyone. We brought up Arkham apparently as our first one. We're clearly winging things as we go along.
Why not? Why
That's,
not?
that's the best way, natural, organic conversation. But yeah,
Exactly. That's the way podcasts should be, or some structure.
if you want to boil it down to its bare bones, yeah, it's basically you're going to have to fight the Joker. He's the main villain in, especially the first one, Arkham Asylum, which is really great. But the point of that one is okay, the beginning of the game, you're Batman, you're dropping off Joker at Arkham Asylum. Yay, you caught the bad guy. Of course, it doesn't stay that way. He breaks out and kind of takes over Arkham Asylum. You know, the lunatics running the loony bin. Great fun story. Although there is an argument to be made whether Joker is actually crazy or not, but that's a whole nother topic about comic books and everything, not video games.
We might cover that on our podcast series coming to you eventually.
Joker takes over the asylum, and then you, as Batman, have to fight through all the different sections of the thing. You fight multiple villains from Batman's Rogues Gallery. It's a really fun game. The combat's fun. In the end, yeah, you do have your final face-off with the Joker, where you kind of do kill him at the end of the first game, which is a big shock. Oh my gosh, you kill the Joker. Dun dun dun! And then, it's been a while since I've played them all. What happened in the next game? Arkham City has to deal with what's his name? Dr. Hugo something. I think it's Hugo Strange.
Dr. Hugo Strange? Yeah.
Correct, because, you know, they kind of stole that from Marvel with Doctor Strange. um, yeah, Dr. Hugo Strange takes over Arkham Asylum, and it is now expanded to the small area of Gotham City surrounding just the asylum itself. That's why it's called Arkham Cities. So there's like the whole little. And again, you're Batman going in, having to find out. Like that one, you start as Bruce Wayne actually being arrested for some reason. I forget that one. And then, you know, you break out of your initial little holding cell, get to the roof somewhere, and get your little Batman costume, and you become Batman for the rest of the game. Kind of fun. Pretty cool. I forget the overarching story. I'm pretty sure the main bad guy, I want to say, is a combination between the Doctor Strange guy and Ra's al Ghul, or Ra's al Ghul, depending on how you say it. Some people argue over how to say it. But yeah, that was a fun one. Then there was Arkham Origins, which was supposed to be a prequel, which was pretty cool. That shows about how the Joker first showed up and started messing around with Gotham. That was a pretty fun one. And then what was the other one? Arkham Knight, I want to think it was, where you face off against the Red Hood, who, lo and behold, spoilers again for anyone who hasn't read the comics or played the games, is actually Jason Todd, one of the Robins that the Joker supposedly killed earlier in Batman's career. Yeah, like the way they showcased that in the game, it was pretty cool. I really liked that whole thing, the way they delve into that story was done really well. I think that was the last official one in the Arkham series. Oh, also, big spoiler for that one. At the end of the last Arkham game, Batman actually dies. Dun dun dun. Or
Wow.
at least they strongly imply that he does, because he gets his whole identity revealed to everybody, and then he drives back to Wayne Manor in the Batmobile, and there's just a big old huge explosion and everything. Like he's just, I'm done. And then the Gotham Knights game came out, and that is not actually a sequel to that game, even though it starts out similarly, where Batman dies. He dies in a different way, though. He dies fighting Ra's al Ghul again. Imagine that. He's one of Batman's greatest nemesis also. But again, however, the Batcave in Wayne Manor gets blown up. I haven't actually finished that game, so I can't say everything about the whole story for that one. I was a little disappointed in the gameplay with that one. It's just not as fun. However, it is kind of cool. You can pick between the four different characters. You can be Robin. I believe it's the Tim Drake version of Robin. You can be Nightwing, Dick Grayson. You can be Batgirl, Barbara Gordon, or you can be the Red Hood guy, Jason Todd. However, this is after he's come back over to the side of good, which is something you do in the Arkham Knight game. You slap him around a little bit and make him a good guy again.
Okay, so the story of the Arkham Knight series, is it just like a general Batman story, or
Yeah, I mean,
are they trying to tell a specific story?
like each game has its own specific story, and there are certain things that carry over in between it, because like they are sequel games, and also like there's so much side stuff too, that like side quests or whatever you want to call them. I call them side quests because that's what
Right.
I'm the MMO, or not even just MMO, but just
Yeah.
RPG player. Like I call them side quests. But like there's side missions. There's all the Riddler trophy hunting things, and that's like another its own sub story. But yeah, basically it's, and I haven't read every single Batman comic ever, so it may be based off or definitely take influences from some Batman comics here and there. They obviously are going to do stuff like that, but
Okay, so game to game, how well did they execute the standalone stories of each game?
I wouldn't say you have to play each game to understand the whole understand stuff that, like, there might be a couple things like, okay, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Like I said, in the first one, the Joker winds up dying. So in the second one, there is talk of the Joker being dead. So if you hadn't, what the heck? How did the Joker die?
Okay.
Stuff. But like, it's mostly just minor things like that. Like, I mean, I guess that one's kind of a major thing. Like what Joker being like considered Batman's number one enemy, you would want to know how he died. But other than that, I can't really think of anything specific. Like what would be like, oh, I shouldn't have played this game without playing the previous ones. So like
So then, individually, how
like
well were the individual stories executed?
they were good. Like they were definitely intriguing enough to make me want to sit through and play them all the way through. Unlocking all the different bat gear and everything, and some games were done better than others. Like I know a lot of people did not like missions where you have to drive around the Batmobile, and I think that was in Origins or maybe Night. Or maybe both. It was like some of or even could have been Arkham City too. Like, I don't know. I just know in the first one you don't drive the Batmobile at all, really, besides in cutscenes, and that doesn't count. But like, I remember.
But that doesn't play to the story aspect of the game.
True. That's more the gameplay aspect.
We'll loop back to gameplay of this series eventually. I think gameplay would be an interesting for us to talk about
No, yeah, like
another podcast.
that's true. Like the gameplay of that series, for the most part, is well loved by many people. It even was a big inspiration for the Insomniac Spider-Man games on PlayStation. Like if you've played both of them, you can definitely tell like, oh, they definitely took inspiration from this other game, the Batman Arkham games. So both very great game series. Love the stories in both of them.
Don't take over to Spider-Man series
Uh
stories. What do we have?
well, for the Spider-Man series, I won't talk too much about the newest Spider-Man 2, because that one's still pretty new. It's less than a year old, so I won't go into the story of that one
Okay.
because of the whole spoilers thing. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure everyone who's really
Yeah.
wanted to play it by now has probably played it, but there could be people out there like, I just recently got it myself and was able to play through it. Overall story was kind of short-ish. If you just stick to the main story, you can get it. Like, I beat the quote-unquote story within a couple of days of getting it. This is a really good story. It definitely continues on and ties back to the other two, the Spider-Man 1 game, or just Spider-Man, I guess they called it, Marvel Spider-Man, and Spider-Man Miles Morales. They are direct continuations, like in order. So like they definitely
So,
do. One game definitely affects the
speak.
other. Definitely play
Okay.
those ones in
So,
order if you want to follow the whole story along.
so speak to the what is it, Spider-Man and then the Miles Morales game. How were those stories?
They are great. Everybody loves them that has played them. It's obviously a little different than maybe some of the 100% diehard classic Spider-Man fans are used to, but the first one that takes place, you play as Peter Parker. Throughout most of it, there are a couple of missions where you play as Mary Jane or Miles, but it's before Miles is Spider-Man, so he doesn't have any of his spider powers, and they're just basically stealth missions because you got to sneak around and avoid being seen by things. Yeah, the story is great. It's includes for your villains. You got the basically the Sinister Six wind up being the main things. They also have Mr. Negative is one of the main villains who I met before that game. I didn't know too much about, so like I thought it was a good introduction to that particular villain. But some of the others I
Okay.
clearly knew very well. Doctor Octopus, Scorpion, Rhino, Vulture, Electro, like those are all classic old school Spider-Man's Rogue Gallery. Not 100% positive, but I think Mr. Negative comes from the Miles Morales thing. I could be wrong, so any Marvel fans, go ahead and feel free to yell at me in the comments.
I'm sure they will if you get anything wrong
Oh,
on that.
I'm sure because that's like if any Marvel fans start watching this stuff, they're very particular about people getting things wrong. So I'm sorry if I got things wrong. Yeah, it's a really good story. Again, there's also other side villains that you have to fight throughout the thing. You know, like the beginning of the first game, you're taking down the Kingpin, who is, if you don't know who the Kingpin is and you're a Marvel fan, you're not a Marvel fan. But he's basically like the crime boss of New York City, hence his name Kingpin. That as a way to start the game was an interesting choice, you know, because a lot of people would think, oh, he would be a main villain throughout the game, but he's just like a way to start the game. So Spider-Man has been Spider-Man for a few years at this point. We don't have to go through the origin story of Spider-Man because everybody knows the whole Uncle Ben situation. We don't have to live through that again. But we do get in that game Miles' origin story played through, so at least a version of it. Like I said, I never actually read the Miles Morales comics. I have heard they did change it up from the comics. The version they went with made me like the character. Like I never had like, oh, I never disliked the character before. Didn't know much about him because I hadn't read any of his comics or anything, seen much with him in it yet.
Fair enough. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, if you haven't seen the character and don't know their story, yeah, you can't really speak to how well they did it with them or not.
true, but I have heard and seen comments on the internet and such like they did a very good job. It is different than his origin in the comics and everything, but still a very good version of it. Especially considering I know that in the Miles Morales comics, Peter Parker's actually dead
Ew.
or does die, so there's only one Spider-Man at a time, whereas in the video game universe, they're both running around as Spider-Man. Especially in the newest game, you can pretty much freely switch in between which one you want to play as. There are certain missions that can only be done as one character or the other, and certain times when this character is locked out of being selected because of story-based reasons that I won't go into because, like I said, I don't want
Right.
to talk about spoilers for that story. But
Okay.
yeah, in the first one, you play, as I said, as Spider-Man. You're purely Peter Parker. It's a great story. Like you start out as working for Dr. Otto Octavius as a lab assistant kind of thing, and you're helping him work on this prosthetic arm thing, which then, of course, through reasons and stuff, you know, winds up he turns into his little Doctor Octopus tentacles and he winds up attaching them and he becomes the main villain of the game, which like for people who don't know about Spider-Man and had just started playing the thing, I guess was an interesting twist. For me, who's been a long time fan of the OG Spider-Man, I'm like, oh yeah, he's a bad guy. We're gonna have to fight him by the end of the game. However, they also have Norman Osborn throughout the games, and like I always figured we would wind up having to fight him as the Green Goblin because he is the Green Goblin, one of Spider-Man's greatest nemesi. I don't know, it's a weird word. I don't know how to say it in plural. One of his worst enemies of all time, especially from a purely comic book standpoint of view. He's his arch nemesis kind of a thing. Some people will argue that point, but I don't care. They're wrong. But yeah, the fact that Green Goblin didn't make an appearance in that game was entirely a shock to me. But also, like, the way they did it was like, I totally understand the story they're going for.
So then,
And
do you feel they executed the story to the best of their ability?
yeah, I think they did a wonderful job with the story. It was definitely intriguing. It definitely made it was hard to try to focus on some of the side stuff because like, oh, you need to go do this. You need to go follow this main storyline. However, there are also parts where they built in-game breaks for it. They're like, okay, I've done this. I've got some free time. Just go swing around the city and find out what else you can do, which I thought was a cool way to not make people focus on the main quests. You can do some of the side stuff and go explore a little bit,
Okay.
which by the way, I love the way they did New York City in those games. It's a great way. Like you can just run around and swing around the whole New York City. It's great fun. It's great fun going to the top of some of these really tall buildings, pulling out your photo mode, which I know you're a big fan of photo mode in
Oh
games,
yes, yes.
and taking some really cool photos and then just jumping off the top and doing a straight dive to the ground and then at the last second swinging away and doing all kinds of fun stuff. Or if you really wanted to, you could splat on the ground, but you're Spider-Man, so you don't die from splatting on the ground.
Seriously?
Seriously, you won't die. You'll just oof and get right back up. He does like this, little animated thing where he does like this little and lands, or sometimes he will.
Wow.
There are some funny animations where he will biff it on the ground too, which is kind of funny. Like, in fact, in the newest one anyway, there's an achievement or trophy, whatever they call it on PlayStation, where you can do tricks while you're swinging in the air. They're called air tricks or whatever. So if you're doing one or attempting to do one and land on the ground, you get an achievement called Splat because you just biff it on the ground if you don't swing out of it in time,
Wow.
which is hilarious. And it's not a secret achievement, so I didn't ruin nothing like that. That's one of those ones that tell you clearly in the achievement or trophies or whatever, like I said, they call it on PlayStation, what to do.
Fair enough. Stories in video games, we've had them for years since almost the beginning.
True.
How do you feel developers today are telling stories versus, say, going back to Donkey Kong? Like, do you feel like stories today are better because we can do more in games, or do you feel that
Yeah.
old school games tell better stories,
I
even with limited technology?
Okay. Yeah. Part of that does depend on the game itself, because there are certain games from nowadays that are just like, okay, there's really no story to this at all. It's just
Yeah.
like, especially a lot of those match 3 games or whatever and stuff like that. And it's like,
Well, you could also go as far as saying Tetris back in the day. There
yeah,
was no story.
I was gonna bring that up
So,
too. Tetris, there's really no story to that. It's kind of for games that do concentrate on story. Definitely unfair to make a comparison between the two because of the technology gap. Whereas nowadays, you definitely have more interactive ways to tell the story and stuff. Whereas back in the old days, you got like a verb of text on the screen for the story.
but do you think the stories themselves, like the quality, like how they are told, not the bubbles on the screen, but visually,
Yeah, that's what I mean.
gameplay
But be
wise?
like the newer ones, they're definitely more interactive. And I don't just mean like, oh, you can walk up to this person and talk to that person, walk up to that person, talk to that person. Just like they tell it. It's you could say it's almost a more cinematic experience with some of the
Right.
storytelling. However, that doesn't mean I like games that are just chock full of what do you call them, cutscenes to tell the story. Like that's one way to
Right.
do it for sure. And like even back in the day, they had their own cutscenes, but like I said, they were pixelated images and text, pixelated images, text, all that kind of stuff. Which nothing against. I love some of those old school games. They're great fun to play even now, or even modern day games. There are still people that do the pixel graphics and stuff, and they can make some very good games out of them. Yeah, not all
So,
games
so from
are
so
made
from
from a
the story
story's perspective.
perspective, so from the story perspective, were games? Do you feel stories were told better yesterday or today?
Uh, that's a little bit difficult to answer because certain games, like let's take Super Mario Brothers for example, that's been such an overarching story that's been going on for all these years that it's hard to think about just the original story without tying in stuff of the newer games. Because like the old school Super Mario Brothers, I don't even think they really gave you anything in game that told you the story other than Sorry, Mario, our princess is in another castle. Back in the day, they also all came with their instruction booklets, and that's where the story was in a lot of those older 8-bit, 16-bit games. Was the story was actually in the instruction booklet, which some people read, some people didn't. Like me, as a fan of stories and games, I read them. So like you find out the whole story of Mario and Luigi going to the Mushroom Kingdom to save the princess, and Bowser and the Koopa kidnapping the princess and all that. Like otherwise, if you didn't read that stuff at all. You're just like, okay, why am I going through this game to save the princess? Like it had the basic story of good guy saving the damsel in distress kind of a story, but you didn't really know the story behind it unless you read like the extra materials like the instruction booklets and Nintendo Power and all those kinds of things back in the day. Whereas
Right.
nowadays, all that stuff would be included in a game. Games are also like 800 million times bigger than they used to be. So
That's true. But I also feel like some games today do not, even when they're story based, don't really tell the story very well.
that's true. That's why I said before it does depend on the game because yeah, there are some quote unquote story based games that I play that I'm like it's either very lackluster and uninteresting, or they don't do a good enough job of telling the story. So it's again then uninteresting. And it's just like, nah, you didn't do good. Like, I know I play a lot more story-based games because that's something I'm a fan of. I'm a fan of the fantasy genre, the RPGs and stuff like that. And those, you need a good story behind those. You need the lore. You need everything of the universe. Whereas you play games like Forza. Is there a story in Forza?
There are stories, at least in Forza Horizon 4. Yeah, they had players, I'm using air quotes here, you can't see it, but they had stories that you played through.
Right. So yeah, like
I
they have
guess maybe
stories.
they had, and they do have, again, air quotes, stories in Horizon 5, but eh? And, okay, you're calling me out for Forza. I
Not
do enjoy the fantasy genre as well. I do enjoy me a good game of Fable.
Fable's a great one too. Yeah.
Yes.
First one was the
Very
best.
much very much waiting for Fable 4.
Yeah, I will definitely play that. Maybe not as soon as it comes out, but when it comes out, it is on my list of games that I want to play.
And for those of you who don't know, he calls me out on Forza and I bring up Fable 4. Funny story. They're being developed by the same studio.
That's so funny.
Funny story, bro. Funny story.
Yeah, well, I care about true stories, brah.
That is a true story.
I know. Speaking of games with stories that I want to play that I haven't yet, and like what's his face called us out on the server the other day that both of us haven't played yet is the Baldur's Gate 3. Definitely want to play
Oh
that
yeah.
game. I've heard the story is great, heard the graphics are great, heard the gameplay is great, heard the way like if you want to do an RPG D&D styled type of game, this is the way to do it. So like for me it's a purely financial reason. I'm pretty sure it's the same for you. Why we haven't been able to play it yet. So
Didn't it win Game of the Year or something?
I keep hearing conflicting reports. Some people say it was Baldur's Gate, which I believe it was. I've also heard a few people mention Spider-Man won it, but then I've also heard people saying no, it didn't. It didn't. Like for me, the new Spider-Man, great game. Of the ones I've played, I guess I could say it's a candidate for Game of the Year, but I don't know. Just from some of the things I've heard about other games, I don't think it would have gotten Game of the Year. And this is coming from a Marvel fan that loves Spider-Man since I was littlest kid. Like just because it's your favorite character and it's a great story doesn't mean it's game of the year material.
Agreed.
Like
Agreed.
it's hard to put that bias to the side, I will admit, because like yeah, the gameplay in it was great, but again, like I said, it's clearly taking a lot of inspiration from the Arkham games, so it's like it's not 100% original, which like I don't really think there was anything groundbreaking in that game to qualify for a game of the year kind of thing. And again, I haven't played Baldur's Gate 3 or any of the other ones that were really up for game of the year yet. I can't make a actual comparison on my view on what should have won game of the year, but just off of my experience and what I've heard from others, I'd say Spider-Man was a close contender, but I don't think it necessarily deserved Game of the Year. And that's without even playing some of the others. Take that with a grain of salt, if you will.
Will do, will do. But again, you're talking about fantasy RPGs and that needing to be the base for a good story.
I'm not saying that needs to be the base for a good. I'm saying those games should have a good story in them. Not saying that, oh, if
So
it's a
what?
game with a good story, it has to be a fantasy RPG type game. That's not true at all, because I've played plenty of other games with great stories that don't have anything to do with fantasy at all whatsoever.
But so had a good story.
Yeah, like, good story just comes down to writing.
Yeah.
Nowadays, the voice acting and how they do that kind of stuff in certain games. For me, I'll bring up a game I particularly or a game series I particularly don't like, and that's the Call of Duty games. But the reason I don't like them is I'm not one of those PvP players. Like, I do like them for their campaign modes and the stories in the campaigns. I'd much rather play the that side of the Call of Duty games than the run around calling people noobs, losers, whatever, campers, all that kind of stuff in the PvP. Like, the PvP side of games just does not intrigue me that much. I'll do it every once in a while, but like, especially Call of Duty for a main example, like, I won't even try that multiplayer anymore because I don't have hours all day to sit and memorize the maps and all this kind of stuff and where stuff spawns and how to do this and do that. Like, I try to play those kind of games and you're dead within 3 seconds every time I try to play those games. And that to me is not fun. For the people that do enjoy them and play them all the time, good for you. I'm not knocking your play style. That's just not something I find interesting to do.
That's fair. As far as the stories of the campaigns, I've heard that the older stories that they did back on the 360 are actually the better stories in those games.
Yep, probably. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not a fan of the Call of Duty series anymore. Like, I liked the old campaigns. I still have the Modern Warfare, the old school Modern
Right.
Warfare, not the new re-released ones. Modern Warfare 1, 2, and 3. I love the stories in those ones. Like you said, they came out on the 360. I haven't played any of the newer Call of Duty games in a good, probably close to 8, 10 years maybe. And I haven't gone through the story of them
The
or nothing.
last Call of
So,
Duty game I owned and actually played the story of was the one everyone says is the worst, and that was Call of Duty Ghosts. And that story was played through it one. I only got the game because it was given to me. Like I never asked for it.
right.
And after playing it, yeah, pretty forgettable. I guess maybe at the time I found it mildly interesting, but again, that was a launch game for the Xbox One back in the early part of 2014,
Hmm.
and I don't remember it very well.
Yeah.
The one game from that time period whose story I do remember, as it was also a launch title, was Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. As you know, I'm an Assassin's Creed fan, and
Yeah.
that game, you were talking to me the other day about Sea of Thieves, and I'm like asking if it's a good game or not. The best way I can describe that versus a Black Flag, even though Sea of Thieves is newer, Black Flag still to this day, I'll load it up. It is still more of a simulator versus Sea of Thieves, which is very
Yeah. Like,
it's
tech.
an 80s arcade game by comparison.
Yeah. Like, technically, they're both quote unquote pirate games, but they're still really two different type of games. Yeah.
Like
Like, they
Assassin's Creed
I would
4.
say they have a similar setting. I wouldn't even say the same setting, just a similar because it's about pirates. That's about pretty much the only thing that they have in common. The Assassin's Creed version is obviously definitely a more serious game, whereas the Sea of Thieves is definitely more focusing on the comedic aspects and stuff of it. And that's just from what I've seen of the little bit I've played of
Yeah.
either of them. I haven't played either of them all the way through or anything yet.
And I'll say this, the story, since we're talking about stories here, I have tried to play through the Pirates of the Caribbean DLC story for Sea of Thieves. And just story alone, I did not find that DLC very compelling. Like it just seemed really lackluster.
Mm-hmm.
Black Flag, that story was really interesting. You start out as what's his name? Edward Kinway, who's just this bumbling privateer. I don't even think he was actually a captain per se in the opening cutscene, but you end up stranded.
Why is the rum gone?
No, that's right. You start out with it in a battle situation where he ends up taking over the ship because the captain died or something,
Right.
I think.
Battlefield promotion, basically.
And so you end up marooned
Mm-hmm.
on this island with this other dude. You don't know who the other dude is, but if you know Assassin's Creed, you recognize his robes. as an assassin.
Okay.
By the end of that opening bit, you've donned the assassin's identity and you've also killed him.
Nice. So you killed your friend and took his clothes.
Well, you aren't really friends to begin with, so.
Kind of like Aragorn in Lord of the Rings. When Boromir dies,
But.
he steals his gauntlets. Way to loot your friend when
So,
he's dead.
yeah, but again, that story, just overall going through the game, you're playing as a pirate, you're figuring things out. It's not until about maybe a third of the way in that you learn about the Assassin Order and what they're about, only because you kind of screwed over the assassins in the Caribbean. And so the rest of the game is redemption.
Nice.
And it is a really cool overarching story. You have a good assassin story, you have a good pirate story.
Nice, nice. Yeah. That's one of those ones I keep meaning to go play. I know you get mad every time I tell you I haven't played it yet. I used to really enjoy the Assassin's Creed games, but I kind of just died off after 3. I stopped really playing them.
Well, number 4 was really good. Due to personal situations, I ended up not playing another one until 8 months after Syndicate came out. I managed to get that one. And unfortunately, people really hate that one.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed it. Within the past 2 years, I finally got my hands on Unity, and I can see why people love it. I can see why people hate it.
Unity is a game engine.
That's a topic for another day.
I know, I just had to throw that joke in there because we are also game devs, or at least attempting to be.
This is true.
And
This is true.
yes, we do happen to be using Unity as our
game engine of choice.
Main tool, yeah. Like I've looked into Unreal a little bit before, and I know there's Godot and all those, but anyway, that's going completely off topic. So you don't have
Getting back to what I was saying about stories.
That's G14 classified.
The overall stories in Assassin's Creed games generally been pretty good. I'm going to give one example where the story did not work, did not make any sense, and everyone in the community agrees that it's probably the worst Assassin's Creed game.
Valhalla?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like everything I've seen about that game, like I've seen people play it. I've seen you play it on Twitch a couple of times. I'm like, this is not an Assassin's Creed game.
It's not even a Viking fantasy game.
No, not really. It reminded me more of, I wouldn't say exactly, but like kind of like the Dynasty Warriors. You're just like running around attacking villages and that kind of stuff. And like, whereas the Assassin's Creed games, most of them anyway that I can remember, especially 1 through 3, like you had specific targets and specific goals you were trying to do. Whereas the Valhalla, great job on the open worldness of it. I think that was done
almost
well.
Too good. Almost too good, only because it was almost too big with very little compelling activities.
Okay, yeah, that's a thing. Like, yeah, like there's a kind of unwritten rule for open world games. Like, if you have to travel over X amount of time to get to a new place to start doing stuff without anything interacting in between, it's not going to be a good open world game. You need to have that
random encounters with enemy soldiers that you just kill in like 2 hits. That's not very enticing.
It's not very enticing, but it's better than just walking that whole distance from point A to point B without anything going on.
I mean, there's a lot scattered about the map, but it's how compelling is it? Like, do I feel rewarded?
Yeah, okay. Like to bring up a game series that, I love, and don't want to talk about it too much because we talked about it a lot in the first one, but the Elder Scrolls series, they're open world games, especially since I started playing it with Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. And yeah, there's certain parts, like especially if you play without fast travel, which is the only real way to play it in my book. Yeah, there's long distances between each main quest hub, so like some people don't like that. But if you are actually just running around and exploring stuff in between those things, you will find so many different things and side things and stuff like you wouldn't even think most people would think to put stuff like that in the game. The point is not just go from point A to point B in those games. It's to discover all the stuff along the way, all the different caves, dungeons, whatever, enemy campments and stuff.
Is there significant stuff to do there?
Yes, you will find entirely, sub quests and side quests and stuff you can only find if you're out just randomly exploring.
Okay,
Like
There's Easter egg content similar to that in Valhalla, but some of it isn't the most obvious, and some of it it's like the only reason why I'm going here is because there's a point on the map saying there's something here, go look at it.
yeah,
Like if you're just out exploring, there's some stuff you aren't going to find.
yeah, whereas in the Elder Scrolls, like, yeah, like when you're first looking at the map, it's all, uncovered. You haven't seen it. And so, like, there's nothing telling you, hey, this is where this particular cave is. I mean, there are ways to find out about specific caves. Like, if you overhear a conversation while you're in a city, you'll get a map marker for a certain place or whatever. But if you're just walking in between this marker and that marker, as you're walking along, you get within close enough to discover it kind of distance, or it'll show up on your
Right.
compass. So you're like, oh, there's something over there. I'm going to go check out to find out what that is.
Okay, so you just brought up something that really relates to what we're talking about today with stories. You just said that your character could overhear discussions in a city.
Yeah.
That is a really cool story element that most people would overlook,
Mm-hmm.
but I find that really compelling.
Yeah, it's a great way. And like I said, specifically in the Elder Scrolls, it's how you find out about certain quests. Like, no, it's not part of the main quest, which in Skyrim, for a specific example, really short. The main quest, you could beat that within a couple of days if you really wanted to, just sat there and focused on it. But that's not the point for me of playing games like Skyrim. It's the open worldness, go out, explore, find stuff. And like I said, some of the really cool quests and items that you can find in the game, you can only find by overhearing certain stories in a thing, like, oh, such and such happened at this thing, I would stay away from there. So then, of course, you want to go there, find out what happened, and find the really cool things and find the cool stuff. And it's just a great way to make people want to go explore the world.
That would have been great for Valhalla because the stories there, one, they did not really have too much dialogue between NPCs that were just around the map. Like, very little meaning.
Yeah.
It was mostly soldiers just being like, did you hear that? Did you see that? Blah,
Oh,
blah, blah, blah. Like,
there are definitely
towns,
that in the Skyrim game, like the guards
townspeople,
can be
though,
very annoying. Townspeople are there's certain townspeople in that game that are very annoying that people thoroughly enjoy killing just because they're teabags.
I mean, in Valhalla, you didn't even get that. You just got quiet NPCs that really didn't offer anything.
Yeah, like plus
Unless it was a side quest.
like another thing I do like about Skyrim and stuff is at one point if you follow this certain quest line, you can become a werewolf. And as you're walking around town and everything, some of the guards will start mentioning stuff. Oh, you smell like a wet dog, or is that fur behind your ears and stuff like that. So it's like it's very interactive and stuff like so like stuff you do in game affects some of the log you will overhear in so like
Yeah, that's not a thing. That's one reason why I say Valhalla. You are great for combat, you're great visually, but story wise, you suck.
yeah, like with Skyrim and the other ones. I will admit, overheard conversations and stuff have gotten better with each iteration of the Elder Scrolls. Because Oblivion, some of the overheard conversations, they were really bad and like clearly scripted, pre-recorded stuff. Like obviously they all are. You could just tell, like, oh, this is you're meant to overhear this. Whereas in Skyrim, it's like you could just stumble across people in mid-conversation and overhear stuff, kind of a thing.
Oh yeah, that is really cool. I can't think of any other games that have that as a function.
Yeah, and then
So in that regard, Bethesda, you're doing really good.
it's not a bug; it's a feature. Like I said,
I was just gonna say, for once, you guys are doing really good, despite the fact that you're riddled with bugs.
there are reasons I enjoy Bethesda Softworks.
What other games or stories do you really enjoy that tell really good, compelling stories? And in video games, what makes a good, compelling story?
It's got to be something that snags my attention. So by default, for me, it's mostly going to be fantasy type games, just because that's my favorite genre. But like I said, it doesn't have to because I've also played other games that have good stories. Like I'm also a big fan of the Metal Gear series, which had nothing to do with fantasy, really. It was more stealth tactical espionage. But that was a good story game. Like that was more about the stealth gameplay, I think maybe. When you do get into the story of Metal Gear, there is some really weird crap that goes on in that world too. The whole thing behind Metal Gear is they're basically giant mechs that have nuclear bomb capabilities, and you want to stop them from falling into the wrong hands. Is like the core story behind the Metal Gear franchise. But
So, how well do you think they tell that overarching story through the individual game.
Been a while since I've actually played one of those games all the way through. Just because they're also hard games, which is one of the reasons I like them. I don't like a game that's too easy. But yeah, like
Based from what you can remember,
there are definitely
based from what you
moments
can
where
remember,
they definitely play a role in some of the story. It's been so long since I played a Metal Gear game. I think the last one I didn't even finish playing it was the Metal Gear 5, and like certain parts of it were like really trippy. And like I'll admit, like even though I'm a fan of the games, I don't know a whole lot of the story. I've never actually sat and played the whole series of games. If you want to go back, it all starts on, I think the first one came out on the NES actually. So like that's how long that game has
oh,
been around. Kojima, the guy who made them, like he's a master at storytelling, which like many people will agree with. Hideo Kojima has great stories. They're might be a little strange and weird in places, but
now, thinking back to good storytelling, in
yeah,
that game series, I feel like has had one of the more interestingly simplistic stories told. Now, then, I might be oversimplifying it, but the Pokemon video games.
okay.
Thinking back to the good old Game Boy days, it was literally copy and paste across all the different games for many years.
Gotta catch them all. Like I never really
It
played
was
the Pokemon games.
story-wise very simple, but copied and pasted over a half dozen games.
Yeah, it's the same basic core story. Is you're going
Yeah,
out to the gyms or whatever, becoming mastering your Pokemon, all that whatever.
yeah.
I don't know. I can't say for sure. I've never really played any of them. I think I played one of the Game Boy versions. I couldn't even tell you which one for a little bit, but yeah, like
So story-wise, when it comes to characters dying, do you prefer game developers to kill off characters who you've gotten to know, or do you mind not knowing who the character really is when they die?
let me put it this way: if it's a character you've come to know and you have a quote unquote connection with, as long as they have it for a good reason where they die, and it's not just simple
Okay.
shock value, we're gonna kill this person out of the blue kind of a thing.
The only reason why I ask that is, again, going to probably the worst storied game I've ever played. Ubisoft, do not come after me, but I'm speaking truth here. Valhalla. They give your character emotional connections to characters who you as the player have only met. Some of the time, they're characters that your character knew at a previous time, and they
Right.
kill them. Or they try and make it seem like, oh, you're supposed to have this emotional connection to this character, even though you just met them 5 minutes ago, and
Right.
they kill them. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
I
That
want to feel something, but I don't even know who this character is supposed to be.
yeah, that reminds me of a skit I've seen online from Viva the Dirt League. Great sketch comedy channel. If you love games and love the logic in games, I suggest you check them out. Hashtag not sponsored. But they have one that's a little series that's about basically the World War II type shooters, And at this one point, like
Right.
it's the start of the quote unquote game, and like the one guy who's supposed to be the player, like he's being introduced to
Yeah.
the different characters in the game, and there's this one guy's like, "Oh, we were best friends growing up back home," and all this kind of stuff, and you hear the guy who's the player's like, "Oh, you're definitely gonna die." And all this kind of stuff. The way they do it in their videos, it's very hilarious. I suggest people who like to laugh at some of the tropes in video games and stuff go check out their channel. It's
Link
hilarious.
will be down below.
They have multiple channels. If you're a fan of D&D, check out their D&D channel too. It's freaking hilarious. They even have for people who aren't too into video games, a retail world based series, which I know I've shared some of the videos with you before. So, but yeah,
Okay.
definitely
So
recommend
getting
checking
back
them out.
on so getting back on the topic of good stories or storytelling in video games in general. Obviously, I've shared Assassin's Creed Valhalla being a prime example of a bad story-based game. How about you? Do you have one where the story is just absolute garbage?
That's hard to say with those specific things because if I don't enjoy the story, I won't finish the game.
Okay.
Like I do have a couple of games that like gone through and like yeah, that story is not interesting enough to me. Or like even games that like aren't really supposed to have like a broad story other than hey, go capture this objective or whatever. Like there was that game came out on the Xbox One called Evolve, where it's a basically it's a 1-on-4 versus type of game where you either play as a monster that you can evolve with as you kill the hunters or whatever, or you play as the hunters. Something. So the basic story is, these four people try to take down this thing. It's probably very similar to what's that horror theme one people are always playing?
Resident Evil.
No, no, Dead by Daylight or whatever.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
so like to me, like the quote unquote stories in those games, they don't drag my attention. Like, oh, run around trying to survive until or kill the thing before it kills you. Like those kind of games don't hold an intriguing enough story for me to keep playing. I've tried them, I've played them for a little bit, and I'm just like, yeah, this is boring to me. So
That one.
so like for me, I need a game with a more captivating story, something like Fable, as you brought up. Elder Scrolls for me, the Arkham games have a good story. The Spider-Man games have a good story, and not just because I'm a superhero fan. I mean, sure that plays a big role. I will admit that probably does play a big role into it for me because I do have that superhero bias. Like I love superhero stuff. That's just me. I don't care. I'm 38 years old and I still love superheroes. Make fun of me all you want. Star Wars games. There's
Old
been
man.
Star Wars games like that. That's actually a good one to bring up. To be more specific, Star Wars Battlefront. I much prefer the
Ooh.
old Battlefront games that came out on the original Xbox than the newer ones. Cause the
Yes.
older ones had like their little campaign slash mode or whatever, whereas these new ones it's just like okay, X amount of number of people on each team and throw them in there and they fight it out. I'm like to me that's not fun. There's no story going on. It's just run
And you
around and
could
kill each other.
almost build your own story with the offshoot campaign mode. I forget what it's called.
Yeah, like I just
Yeah.
could not get into the newer ones. Like I loved the older ones. I still have them. I will still play them on occasion. Obviously I love the
I have them digitally on the
yeah
Xbox One.
yeah that's how I have them. Is I have them
Yeah.
digitally now. Like I used to have the hard disk. I think my brother still has some of the hard disk versions because he has all his old consoles still. So I'm like, I pretty much told him, hey, I've got all these old games. If you want any of them, you can take them. I don't have the. I mean, I guess I still technically have my 360s, but I don't ever hook it up. I don't ever play them. They're just display nowadays, pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much my Xbox One is too. I'm mostly just playing my Series S right now, and I have a PS4 and a PS5 also. PS4 is technically hooked up, but I don't ever turn it on anymore.
Okay, so getting back to the stories of the original Battlefront.
Yeah, they were much. I don't know why. I just it placing you like within the battles of the actual universe. Like I remember you had
Yeah.
the Force of Endor was one of the ones. Like you got to play as both sides too, which was great.
Yep.
Like it was fun being the stormtroopers and running around blasting the heck out of Ewoks.
Yep. Which was actually a thing back then.
Yeah, it was totally like it was like I don't know. Like I will say graphically and all that stuff. Obviously, the new ones are much better. That's nothing to do with storyline and
You
just
know,
like
as far as story goes, now that even the original Battlefronts, do you remember the clone story of the 501st Legion they told in Battlefront 2?
I don't remember the details of it exactly, but I also, speaking of clones themselves, thoroughly enjoyed the Republic Commando game that they had back in the day.
That was legendary.
I still have that one on in my digital collection. Like I have almost all the Star Wars games. I won't say all, but almost all of them, especially the Xbox ones anyway. That in my digital collection nowadays.
Okay, since you brought up Star Wars, I'm just going to go there. There is a story based single player game from back in the day that even a remaster or an outright remake, as long as they stay true to the original story, because God, that story was so good.
KOTOR.
Yes, but no.
KOTOR 2.
Yes, but no. Damn. And because of Disney Plus lately, I really feel like a remake of this original game would be so good.
Pod Racer? Just kidding.
Still no, but yes, but no. Bounty Hunter.
Oh yeah, the Bounty Hunter game. Yeah,
Oh man, the origin story of Jango Fett. Gosh darn.
I think I have that
game,
one too.
That game kicked ass.
It might
That
be
game legit kicked ass.
it might be on my old PlayStation account, which unfortunately I don't have access to anymore because I don't have access to the old email and password, which sucks.
Like, if I could play that game again, oh my god, I would.
Yeah,
That game was so good. Like, could you imagine that game being remade today? You keep the original story, you keep the original dialogue, but remake it today.
Yeah, could be done very well.
Oh man, that game was so action packed. The story was so rich. You have him get his jetpack. You have him get the Slave One. Yes, controversy. I still call it the Slave One.
That's the name of the ship. I don't care what anybody says. It's called Slave One.
Yes, yes, I'll die on that hill. Thank you.
Go ahead and cancel me. I don't care.
Yes, it is technically the Osprey class whatever ship, but it was given the name Slave One. Sue George Lucas. Like, seriously, sue him.
Don't even sue him. It's just the name of a ship.
But if you want to sue anyone for a silly name, sue him.
Don't sue anybody. It's called Grow Up and Don't Be Offended by Every Stupid Little Thing.
So, you see where that ship came from. Like, the actual mission where you end up with that ship at the end. Oh my god, that was such a cool mission. It was literally, you're trying to get a bounty who is inside of a prison. And you had to be stealthy throughout. And it was a really dark level, like physically dark.
Oh, so it was like a Zack Snyder movie?
And it was really difficult to see a lot of the time, but it was a great level overall. And the end of it, you also met up and got help from, what's her face from Attack of the Clones, Zam, I can never remember her last name, but the bounty hunter he hired to kill Padme at the beginning of that movie.
Yeah, the changeling or whatever.
Yeah, the shapeshifter.
Yeah, I can't remember her name either, but I know exactly who you're talking about.
And it's literally because of that level, I believe, that she ends up helping you. And basically, she owes Jango Fett a huge debt that, impossible to pay, so she just ends up working for him. But also, this game also explains how Jango Fett met Lord Tyrannus, aka Count Dooku.
Yeah, it surprises me how many people don't know that Darth Tyrannus is also Count Dooku.
So that game, it also talks about how Jango was selected for the role of being the clone host. Like, there's a whole backstory behind that.
With Master Sifo Dyas?
Yeah, sure. It's totally Sifo Dyas. Totally.
Hey, I'm sticking to what the movie people tell.
But again, there's a whole backstory behind it that gets told, and it's like, damn, it wasn't just a great action-packed game, but the whole story. Speaking of good stories from that era of Star Wars, look at the Obi-Wan game, talking about young Obi-Wan.
Yes, my brother just recently rebought that game for his 360, or not his 360, his Xbox, because he's been on his retro game spree, so yeah, that is when we will be playing again soon.
Like, the opening, I think it's like 4 or 5 missions, is backstory to Obi-Wan, leading into Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
Yeah,
where most of the game takes place. You know, that's something else. Video games that were adapted from other media, I'm going to touch on that very briefly here because, again, the way they did the story was really good. They did literally the Phantom Menace movie at least 2 times that I'm aware of in video game form. One is the Obi-Wan game. The other was literally Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, the game.
Yeah.
And that game was also incredibly well done. Like, following the story, using the movie cuts as a cutscene, but also the in-game story elements. Really great.
Yeah, I would say most of the Star Wars games, story-wise, have been pretty good.
Jeez, I could spend a whole episode talking about those games.
Yes, I'm sure you could.
Any other stories related to games or story-based games you want to talk about?
Nothing coming to mind offhand, but I did want to bring this up, kind of tie it back to the beginning of our little podcast here. We started talking about the Arkham games, and to prove how much I like this story, I own it for the Xbox 360. I own the physical edition of the Batman Return to Arkham, which had Arkham Asylum and Arkham City together in it. And I also own the digital versions on all my Xboxes. So if the game was worthy enough for me to buy 3 times, I think I enjoyed the story.
Okay, that brings up another thing that you've done that I know about.
Skyrim.
And I know you mentioned it briefly last episode. How many different places do you own Skyrim?
I own, again, like I said, I own the original 360 version disc. I have the digital version on my Xbox, so that's Xbox One slash series versions. I have it on my PS4. I have it on my computer, and yeah, like me and a couple other people out there single-handedly have kept Bethesda from going bankrupt because we keep buying it every time they re-release it.
And part of that is because it had such a good story, right?
Yes and no. The thing
Like I said, part of it.
with Skyrim is the story, the way they do the story is like the story's what you want to make out of it.
Exactly. The story is what you make it.
So, like, yeah, like I know people that play Skyrim that don't pay a single lick of attention to the main quest line story. Like, yeah, they've played it and like, okay, that's cool. But other people that are like, oh, I'm going to play this strictly as, a assassin. So I'm going to go join the Assassin's Guild. Or I'm going to play it as the thief. I'll go join the Thieves Guild. Or you can join both and all of them and all that kind of stuff. Which, that was one thing I think Morrowind, which was the first Elder Scrolls games I really played. I liked a feature that they did in that. Like, if you joined the Thieves Guild before you joined the Fighters Guild, you couldn't join the Fighters Guild, or the other way around. Whereas nowadays in Skyrim, yeah, you can join every faction and play through and become the head of every faction, which some people do that way. Like, I'll do it that way sometimes too, just because I like the perks and rewards you can get. But I will say most of the time when I play Skyrim, I do start as a thief type character. Like, I just enjoy the Thieves Guild storyline and the Assassins Guild storyline,
Right.
which also tying into the things I brought up about how, like, if you become the werewolf in the one thing, like, the guards will talk to you differently if you're in the Thieves Guild or if you're in the Assassins Guild sometimes. Like, there'll be times, like, even though part of it doesn't make sense because you won't be wearing the actual Thieves Guild armor, but if you're walking around a guard, sometimes the guard will say, hey, I recognize that armor. I know a Thieves Guild armor when I see it or something. I'm like, dude, are you kidding me? I'm wearing pretty much the same exact armor as you are. But if you are wearing the Thieves Guild armor, it makes a little bit more sense. Or if you join the Assassins Guild, they're like, hey, I know who you serve. Psst, Hail Sithis, which is in the story of the thing. He's like the god that the assassins worship is Sithis.
Sithis?
Sithis.
Sithis?
Yes. Sithis. Sithis.
Wow, gee, I wonder where they got that name idea from.
I don't know. They had it pretty long too.
I mean, how long has Skyrim been around?
Well, the lore behind it has been around much longer than Skyrim.
Yeah, how long has it been around? Has it been around longer than 1977?
I don't think so.
Okay, then.
But
I think you know where they got it.
It's not necessarily mean they exactly swiped Sith and Sithis together. Just because words sound similar doesn't mean they stole it.
I didn't say they stole it. I just said got inspired from.
Possibly.
I mean, it's no coincidence there.
I don't know. I doubt it too. Like you say, there's probably some inspiration taken, but like also this is one of like so many freaking gods, and like that's one of the reasons I love the Elder Scrolls universe and even the Warcraft universe is all the rich, detailed lore that is behind all of them.
So the stories behind the story.
Yeah, like I love games with good, thought out, well placed lore instead of just like, hey, this is the story for this particular game. It's a standalone thing. Like those can be fun too, for sure. But especially in games that are a series of games, you have to have well established lore. And I will admit there are times where some of the games contradict some of the other lore in the worlds. That's why the Elder Scrolls Online is not technically considered canon with the Elder Scrolls games. It's like, okay, this is like another multiverse version of what could have happened, even though it takes place like hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years before anything in any of the Elder Scrolls games does. And like they have some of the same base, historical lore of the gods and the world and all that kind of stuff. But it's kind of like a what if, I guess you could say.
Right. Okay, so let me ask this. You said you really like the games with well-established lore, already set up. What about a game series where every game they're adding to the backstory lore along the way?
Yeah, like that's how those games start out, because obviously at one point, the beginning thing, you have to create, you might create some of the backstory lore and everything to start your world that you're making, especially in a fantasy world type game, you're going to have to create some lore. But as you go on, you can add to it. And the Elder Scrolls does make reference to previous games, even though they're supposed to be hundreds of years in between them,
Right.
Like in in Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, there's this whole massive thing that affects the entire world with the Oblivion gates opening and invasions happening. And yeah, it's not something that they completely ignore. Like, they talk about it in the Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim. They definitely bring it up, like, hey, such and such happened, like, and they talk about how that game ended with one dude sacrificing himself to save the world and all that kind of stuff. And they will mention your player character, not exactly by name, but by the in-universe name that they gave your player character. Like, in Skyrim, you're the Dragonborn. In Oblivion, you were known as the hero of Kvatch. Or in Morrowind, you were known as the Neververine or whatever. I can never say that word. It's a dark elf word. But, like, yeah, they will mention certain things that happened in the main story quest lines of those games. They will be brought up, like, as, like, hey, yeah, they will reference them, or you will find books. Like, that's another thing I like about the Elder Scrolls universe is all the books you can find and read within the world that build into, like I said, it's part of the lore, and it tells you some of the old lore, helps you build up the lore and everything. So, like, I like game series that have continuity to them, but aren't necessarily also direct sequels either.
Right. Like in that regard, the Assassin's Creed series, part of the lore has been constantly worked on and constantly built over the games to the degree that now, in some regards, you could say some of it contradicts itself.
Yeah, there will be times in any kind of thing.
Any final words? Any final thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
Yeah, if you're gonna have a game series that has established lore, it's okay if you make some contradictions here and there. Just don't shit all over the established lore.
Any final words on stories and games in general?
Not that I can think of. You have any final thoughts?
Yeah, developers, give us really good, compelling stories. That's what we really want. Multiplayer is great, but let's get back to what made video games really good in the first place, and that was good, solid stories.
Yeah, I'll say I much prefer playing single player or co-op with a good story versus
yes.
PvP type game. But
quit forcing multiplayer down our throats every 5 seconds.
I will admit there is also a huge fan base for the PvP and stuff, and people that could give a jack about the story,
True.
Like, so, like, you will never be able to please everybody, and that's perfectly fine. For the people that like those PvP run around, run and gun, shoot 'em ups, enjoy the heck out of them. Have fun playing that stuff. It's not my personal type of game, is all I'm saying.
I just remember a few years ago, there's something that came out where, we stopped doing single-player games because they weren't popular anymore. And it's like, no, you guys should stop making them and try to force multiplayer everything on us. No, give us good single-player games and we'll buy them.
Yeah, and I'm not opposed to games having both in it either.
True.
As long as one doesn't feel forced in, Like, there have been...
Even Battlefront 2 2017?
I didn't bother playing it, so I have no idea. But, yeah.
They literally forced a single-player story that absolutely sucked into a multiplayer game.
Okay, yeah, then, yeah.
Oh, man, that's so bad.
Yeah,
it was promoted as one thing, and it turned out it was literally clickbait in real time.
Yeah, clickbait's fun. that was sarcasm, by the way. I hate clickbait. Even though I will admit, every now and then I still freaking fall for it. Freaking clickbait, like, it works. As much as I hate it, it works, because it will... I'm like, this is definitely clickbait. Yeah. I still click on it to read it.
The marketing for that game's single-player campaign was pure clickbait. Everyone who's played it knows... Everyone who knows the controversy there, you all know. I don't need to rehash it right now.
Y'all know.
So, with all that said and done, we look forward to having you like, subscribe, share, turn on those notifications, and tune in for next week's.
Don't forget to leave comments.
Who knows what's going to be episode.
Leave comments. We will try to respond to comments. As of right now, we don't get any comments, so if you comment, I'll respond.
As of right now, we've only had one podcast episode up.
Yes, and I'm the only one who commented.
So, like, subscribe, share, comment, give us feedback, and technical issues that we already know about, we're working on.
And yeah, if you have comments, like, you have stuff you want us to talk about, or, things you would like to hear our opinions about, Let us know.
We
Indeed.
have many topics more we're going to be talking about. Hopefully, some guests will come in and we'll talk to them about some of these topics. Who knows? Who knows where
Who
this is going
knows?
to go? But sit tight and enjoy.
Mazel tov. This has been ZDSS Studios.